We are very pleased to have Dr. David Wiemer here from the University of Iowa, and he's been giving talks on the ACS speaker tour. So he started out in Dearborn on Monday, and Ann Arbor on Tuesday, and Kalamazoo yesterday, and he's here with us today and gets back to Iowa City tomorrow. So he's not necessarily all the same talk. No. Dr. Wiemer is professor of chemistry at University of Iowa, and he's also the chair of the department, and he finds time to come out and tell us some good things about herbal products in this particular case. So we welcome you here and let you go.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm here, I guess, as an ACS speaker, and this is actually the second time I've done the Michigan tour. And I was feeling really good about that because I felt that probably meant I didn't screw up too badly on the first one, or I wouldn't have gotten invited back again. And then I happened to look, and I'm not in any of the same cities on the second tour. So now I'm not 100% convinced. But in any event, I appreciate the invitation. When they offered me the chance to come back to Michigan, I accepted right away. It's always fun to go through the state here. The friendly folks make it always feel like home. What I put together in this talk tonight is in sort of a generic sense. There's a fairly long introduction that I'm going to more or less ramble through and try to tell you how I got interested in this particular topic. And then there's a few slides in the middle that's some real hardcore organic chemistry, because the bottom line is that I'm sort of a hardcore organic chemistry kind of guy, and I can't not show any. But I'll give you some warning when that's coming up, and if you're not really seriously interested in organic, you can use those few slides as an opportunity to have a short nap or stretch your legs or whatever. And then I'll wrap this up and try to put it in some perspective. Okay. Okay. Let's use this one. And to tell the story, I have to tell you how I got interested in this. I've had a long and a wonderful career as a faculty member. The whole career has been spent at the University of Iowa. And it's just been wonderful. And through the whole time, things that were supposed to be stressful somehow never particularly stressed me. Many people worry, will I be promoted? Will I get tenure? Will I get this grant funded? I never really worried about any of those things. I went through them all because all faculty members do, but I never really worried. And then about 5 years ago now, I was trapped into becoming the department chair. And I didn't grow up wanting to be an administrator. I just got convinced that it was my turn to do it. And so I agreed to do it. And shortly after that, I couldn't sleep through the night anymore. I'd wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and there'd be things going through my mind, some of the intractable problems that administrators have to deal with because somebody has to deal with them. And in some cases, there is no clear-cut answer. There's only the answer that's going to make this group unhappy or the answer that's going to make that group unhappy. And so you have to work through this. And I'd lay awake and my mind would be racing and I couldn't go back to sleep. So I started getting up at 4 in the morning and watching television for a while because that would put me back to sleep pretty quickly. Now, I'm not sure what's on TV here at 4 in the morning, but apparently television time in Iowa City is fairly cheap, because at 4 in the morning at least, because if you look at most any channel, what you'll find is some infomercial. And a lot of these infomercials are trying to sell you, well, they're all trying to sell you something. A lot of what they're trying to sell you are things that they say will improve your life. So I'd sit in my chair in the family room and look, and then I'd whip out my laptop and connect to the net and try to find out more about some of these things that were being advertised. And this is one of the products that I found advertised on the web. CY Longevity is the #1 anti-aging pill in America. Slow time with the ultimate formula. Old age can be put off for decades. Well, those of you in the audience in your 20s, I'm absolutely certain that's true. When you get to be my age, it's more important, but it's harder to do. What's in this? The only product in the entire world to combine real HGHR and 2-AEP. Okay, HGHR has been in the news a fair amount lately. This is the human growth hormone. And I don't know, maybe some of you saw Roger Clemens when he testified to Congress that, I never took this hormone, but my wife did. I thought that was sort of a cheap shot, but she admitted that she took it. And she probably did. She admitted she did, so I guess she did. But when she took it, you have to take this human growth hormone by injection because it's a protein. And like any other protein, when it hits the acids and enzymes and such in your stomach, it gets broken down to its constituent amino acids. And it doesn't matter if you eat a ham sandwich or if you take this protein in a pill form. When that protein gets to your stomach, it's going to be digested. And so putting the human growth hormone in a pill doesn't do you any good. You might just as well have a ham sandwich, my personal favorite. 2-AEP, well, this is 2-aminoethylpicolinate, and it's actually a sort of common additive to pharmaceutical things to prevent mold from growing. It's put into some cosmetics, too, to prevent fungi from growing on different things. But this is the only product in the entire world to combine these two things, and if you use it, the implication is you can slow down the aging process. This just caught my attention because it's the only product I saw that actually claimed to slow aging. But there are herbal products that claim to do everything, help you quit smoking. I'm not going to talk about some of the ones that promise to enhance your love life, but there are a lot of those on the market. Probably the most common ones, though, are the ones that are directed at some form of weight loss. Now, in this country, virtually everyone is overweight. The only question is how much. And almost every adult American goes on a diet at some time in their life. And the ideal diet is one where you don't really have to do any extra work, and you don't really have to stop eating anything that you like to eat. You just take some pill and you lose weight. That's the American idea of the ideal diet. It sounds good to me. And here are some of the products that you can buy on the web, or at least that you could at the time I was researching this. Metabo Ultramax. They combine these different words to make it sound sort of scientific. This is a natural weight loss supplement. I'm going to come back to this idea of natural fairly often. There's no risk. Try it free. Oh, yeah, if you believe that, we should talk later. No ephedra, no crash dieting, no painful exercises. Now, one of the rules and one of my rules is never buy anything from a website that can't spell. Okay? And we're going to come back to that a surprising number of times tonight. But no painful exercises. Slender Lean, Miracle Burn, Yellow Subs, and Stacker 2. I actually encountered this young lady in no less than 8 different advertisements for weight loss products. And you would think with that much experience, she would know how to buy a pair of jeans that actually fit. But no, she always has jeans that apparently illustrate how much weight you can lose if you take this product. Now, some of these may help you. I don't know. I haven't taken them all. Some of these may harm you. I'm pretty sure about that, and that's what I'd like to explain next. And the one that I'm going to focus on for a while is this one here called Stacker 2, because in my opinion, I'm not a medical doctor, but in my opinion, this product is awful. So if anyone's taken it, please, it's reversible over time. So it's not like you're doomed forever. But if you're taking it now, I would strongly encourage you not to. Stacker 2, Herbal Dietary Supplement. It says this in sort of the fine print here that's hard to read. World's strongest fat burner. And the idea that these concoctions offer you is that there's some pill, something that can trick your metabolism into taking off weight without increasing your exercises or decreasing your food. And that just doesn't work. That just doesn't work. But they advertise them in lots of different ways. In one particular commercial I'd seen, this young man comes on the screen and says, "My name is Jared. I used to look like this. And I started taking Stacker 2, and now I look like this. I got biceps." And I'm thinking, well, gee, if I could use biceps, I suppose. And he says, the best thing about going from this to this is that people don't recognize me. So if I didn't like them when I look like this, I can pretend I don't know them because nobody recognizes me anymore. And he claims in his verbal statements that all he did was take these pills. Well, if that were true, I think I'd line up to take these pills because I would like to have biceps that look like that too. So I'm curious. It's 4 in the morning. The internet is not busy at 4 in the morning in Iowa City. So you go about 8 or 10 or 28 links into this, and you can actually see some information about what's in these pills. And I'm a chemist. I want to know what's in these pills. World's strongest fat burner. Help you suppress uncontrollable cravings. I guess that's for food. Recharge low energy levels. Each Stacker 2 capsule contains the perfect ratio of imported Chinese ephedra, kola nut, and white willow bark. The perfect ratio. Now, in this product description, it doesn't tell you what that ratio is or how much of any of these materials is in there. You have to go about 20 links deeper into this to find out more information. And I cut this from places further in. Serving size, 1 capsule. Servings per container, 100. It's a big bottle. It goes for about $69.95. So it's not cheap. Amount per serving, percent daily value. There's an asterisk, and that asterisk is actually another link that you have to follow for a while. And then it says that the daily value hasn't been established. So this is the perfect ratio, mind you, but they don't know how much you should take. Okay, what does it have in it? Well, half a gram of something. 225 milligrams of ephedrine alkaloids, kola nut extract supplying about 200 milligrams of caffeine alkaloids, white willow bark of unknown amount, and picolinate. And we're back to that AEP, picolinate, something to prevent spoiling. Okay, now of these three, I'd be willing to bet that caffeine alkaloids is something that most of you are familiar with. And for my own amusement, if you wouldn't mind, coffee, tea, Coke, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, they all have caffeine. I read in USA Today a couple of weeks ago that 90% of adult Americans have caffeine every day. So could I have a show of hands? There's no embarrassment. If I had my coffee this morning, so yeah, I think we're about 90% here. So, it probably doesn't hurt you, but if you go down to Starbucks nearby and get a good cup of drip coffee, it probably has about 100 milligrams of caffeine in it. So in this pill that you're taking, you've got the equivalent of 2 cups of coffee. And the instructions at this time told you to take 2 of these pills before every meal, 6 pills a day, 12 cups of coffee a day. If I drank 12 cups of coffee a day, I wouldn't have to get up at 4 in the morning. I'd be up at 4 in the morning. And I suppose that could help me lose weight because I'd never sleep. But probably caffeine by itself, people have studied this for a long time because it's taken by so many people in so many forms. And probably caffeine is not directly harmful to you, although there's some caveats to that I'll come back to in a minute. I suspect that you folks in general are probably less familiar with white willow bark. I was, but I had a lot of time, so I went and tried to dig out what is white willow bark. And it's exactly what you might think. It's the bark from the white willow tree. What does it have in it? The major ingredient in white willow bark is a chemical called salicin that has this structure. And in essence, what you're looking here is sort of a 2-part structure. This is glucose connected in this acetal linkage to this aromatic compound. And you take this, you eat this, it hits your stomach, a couple of things happen. Hydrolysis of the glycosidic linkage sets the glucose free, and that doesn't hurt you, that's just glucose, it's just sugar. And then you set the aromatic compound free, and the aromatic compound undergoes metabolism that oxidizes the benzylic alcohol to the carboxylic acid, and then you have a compound known as salicylic acid. Okay, well, what is salicylic acid? You may or may not recognize that acetyl salicylic acid is what's known as aspirin. And when you take an aspirin, you've got an acetyl ester at this position, and this undergoes metabolism when it hits your stomach and your bloodstream, and the ester bond is cleaved, and you release salicylic acid. Why do we take acetyl salicylic acid instead of salicylic acid itself? This is a little less irritating to the stomach. Okay? But if you take a lot of white willow bark, it is equivalent to taking a lot of aspirin. And they don't really say how much is in here. This 2.5 to 11% is the percent of salicin in white willow bark. And they don't tell you how much white willow bark, so you don't really know how much aspirin you're taking, but you're taking a lump of aspirin in these, and you're taking it 3 times a day. Is that bad for you? I'm going to come back and talk about that at the end of the talk, because the answer could be yes under some circumstances. But I think the most troublesome ingredient in this gamish is this ephedra. Now, I know this is true because I found it on the net. Okay? And I found it at the ephedra demon website. What more authoritative source of information on ephedra could you find? Ephedra is a Chinese herb. It's used in traditional Chinese medicine, and it contains the active compound ephedrine. Ephedrine is a stimulant, provides energy, and increases alertness. I got no problems with all of that. A higher dose ephedra gives nice tingling sensation over the head, but also the rest of your body. Ephedra acts a bit like ecstasy. Okay, I don't know that, but that's what they say. Only it's milder in its action and less speedy. Ephedra does give the same emphatic feeling. I'm not sure I know exactly what an emphatic feeling is. I think I've had them sometimes in my life, but I'm not certain. Like you have with ecstasy, but I am certain I'm not going to take ecstasy to find out what an emphatic feeling is. So, but the folks, the good people, the good-hearted souls at the ephedra demon website insist that this is a wonderful thing for you to take. There are 2 views on that, however. And this is one of the earliest publications I've been able to find from someone who sounded sort of legitimate as a medical expert, the Air Force Surgeon General. And in essence, what they said is that ephedra may be associated with important health risks, and there's only limited evidence of health benefits resulting from ephedra use. And in all of life, we have to make these choices between the risks of doing something or taking something and the benefits that you get from it. And in this case, if there's only limited evidence of any benefits, but there's some important health risks, I thought, well, what are those health risks? Maybe I should look up more and see what those health risks are. And they're in the bold print here. The bold print is mine. The words are from the Surgeon General, but the bold print is mine. The adverse events include heart attack, seizure, stroke, and death. And where I come from, death is a fairly serious adverse effect. The risk can increase with the dose. The more you take, the more likely you are to die from it. It can increase with strenuous exercise and with other stimulants such as caffeine. What's in these pills? Caffeine, ephedra, and aspirin. Okay, anybody know the warning signs of a heart attack? Probably number 1 is chest pain. But if you're taking the equivalent of bunches of aspirin at the same time that you're taking this, you're probably taking something that's going to mask the pain. All right? So this is what's sometimes called a stack. That's where the name comes from, stacker 2. And in my opinion, it ought to be banned. Has been. And then there was a lawsuit that challenged the ban, and it was back on the market. And then that went to appeal, and the ban was reinstated. And then there was another appeal, and the ban was overturned for a while. And supposedly the FDA has banned products containing ephedrine at this point in time from over-the-net sales. And yet last night I went on the web in Kalamazoo and found 3 stores in 5 minutes where you could buy this, or where they told you could buy this. What you're actually buying, I don't necessarily know, but I found places that certainly offered to sell this. This is the chemical structure of ephedrine. And I don't know, it's sort of an innocuous-looking structure. There's some stereochemistry I didn't bother to put in here, but it's a sort of simple structure. It's closely related to a compound you may have heard of before called methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is the most important drug of abuse in the state of Iowa, probably in Michigan too. I don't know, but probably. And the difference between these two structures is the presence of one oxygen at this position. Organic chemists get lazy and we don't draw all the hydrogens here, but one oxygen is the difference between these two structures. And it's worse than that, because if you take methamphetamine, your body can, in an effort to detoxify it, oxidize this position and add an oxygen there. In essence, converting methamphetamine to the somewhat less potent ephedra. But it can also do the opposite metabolic trick, taking ephedra and reducing this oxygen away to get to methamphetamine. And it's believed that's why ephedra is so difficult to separate yourself from. People argue that it's not addictive, that it is addictive. I don't know that I want to get into those arguments. But methamphetamine is certainly addictive. Okay, why don't people take this off the market? Why doesn't the government ban this? Well, it's this difference between a food supplement and a natural material and what is recognized as a pharmaceutical drug. Okay, and to me, they're all chemicals. But in the context of politics, it doesn't always work exactly like that. And herbal products are big business in this country. This is data that came from a story I saw in 2002. And even in 2002, 5-6 years ago now, we're looking at the 8 largest products in this country, and we're looking at like $200 million a year in sales that long ago. So it's a big business in this country. Now, I don't argue that echinacea is nearly as harmful. It may even be beneficial. I'm going to come back and talk about that somewhat later. But the herbal products industry, in many cases, has fought and lobbied and sued very vigorously to prevent regulation, because the Food and Drug Administration generally regulates drugs. And if it's a food, it has a much less, or a food supplement, it has much less regulatory authority. I have to say this sort of carefully. So, you know, the combination of all kinds of people out there that are willing to sell you herbal products, the ones that are sort of traditional and have large markets and have been used a great deal, and the ones that are more extreme, in my opinion, like Stacker 2, is not all that big a step. Especially when you consider that Americans in general are turning to the web for information about everything, including information about herbal products. And so I saw it on the web. It must be true, right? Must be true. I looked myself up on the web a couple of weeks ago and found that I served with distinction in the Civil War. So that made me happy. I'm not going to say which side. Okay, so is there a way to study these more scientifically, to study these herbal products? Are there ways that you could look at them and harness the good that they may provide in more traditional ways to Western medicine, as opposed to some of the approaches of traditional medicines in China, in India, and so on? And I would suggest there are at least a couple, and I'm going to show a couple examples of these tonight in the area that I'm most familiar with, which is the development of potential anti-cancer agents. So this is a pretty flower. This is the common periwinkle, and it's the source of an anti-tumor alkaloid known as vinblastine. And I didn't draw the structure because it's complicated, and for the purposes of this, it's not particularly important to look at the structure. It's a very complicated structure. Has great activity against leukemias, and it's been used since the early 60s in treatment of leukemias, and it's got some nasty side effects, but there are one awful lot of people around today who owe their lives to the presence of this particular drug in the pharmacopoeia. It's listed as an anti-neoplastic agent and anti-cancer drug. This is one anti-cancer drug that came from a plant. Here's another, Taxol. Taxol is more recent. It was discovered in the early 70s by Wall and Wani at the Research Triangle in North Carolina, and published in the 70s. It took a long time to figure out how to use Taxol as a drug. As a chemical, Taxol is so insoluble that it's very difficult to administer as a drug. And the way it is done nowadays is to put it in this carrier called cremophore, which is a nasty substance that causes people who take this all kinds of side effects. But Taxol as a drug is very effective at treating certain forms of ovarian cancer, some uterine cancer, some breast cancer, some prostate cancers, and it's widely used in these ways and under exploratory use in a variety of other different cancers as well. Now, I don't have a pretty picture of the flower because as far as I can tell, the Pacific yew doesn't flower, but this is what the fronds of the Pacific yew look like, and this was the original source of Taxol. I could have found others if I wanted to spend more time in the library or on the web looking, but if there's 2 examples, there must be more. And then the question I would raise, just for your consideration, is if you wanted to find the next compound as a potential anti-cancer agent, how would you go about looking for it? Okay? Where would you go to look? How would you look? And there are lots of answers to that. 2 of them I'd like to present to you briefly tonight. And I'm going to present these particular strategies because my students and I have been involved in these approaches for some time. So one thing you can do is just screen various plant sources collected at random from around the world and see if there's anything in them that kills cancers. Another thing you can do is look at natural remedies, plants that have been used by native peoples at different countries around the world, to see if there's anything in them that is useful in a true sense of a prescription drug. And I'll talk about both of these in turn, more maybe about the top one than this one, but both strategies have proven useful. So the National Cancer Institute runs a very substantial lab at Frederick, Maryland that screens plant, animal, and microbial extracts for new anti-cancer agents. It's a wonderfully large and complex organization that does just an awful lot of research in a year. They have the capability of screening as many as 20,000 samples in a year. That's a lot of samples. Where do they get them from? Well, they actually pay people to go around the world collecting stuff. And so they'll hire someone and send him to Brazil and have him walk through the rainforest and collect every plant he encounters, or hire someone and send her to Indonesia and go through the forest there and collect every plant they encounter and bring them back. So they do this pretty routinely, and when they get those things back, they use a strategy that I'd like to explain that's called activity-directed isolation sequences. And they use this strategy to try to find specific chemicals, individual chemicals in the plant that might be useful in treatments of different forms of cancer. Now, stage, how many compounds do you think there are in a plant? No, I don't know. There's a lot. It's sort of a trick question because it almost depends on what level you can measure them at. If you can measure them at the 1% level, then you won't find anything that's less abundant than 1% in a plant, so you wouldn't find more than 100. But we can actually do compounds at parts per million level now, and that means you won't find more than 1 million. And in favorable cases, we can identify compounds present at the part per billion level, which means you won't find more than 1 billion in a plant. But it would take a long time to characterize 1 billion compounds, and so you don't want to characterize everything that's in a plant. You want to characterize the important ones. And how do you decide what's important? Well, you use some bioassay to tell you. So if you're looking for anti-cancer agents, you maybe take an extract of the plant, and that extract might be hexane. You take the plant and boil it up in hexane, or you take the plant and boil it up in water, or some solvent, and you take an extract of the plant, and that will recover some subset of the total number of compounds in the plant. And then you take that as a crude mixture and you test it to see if it has the biological activity that you're interested in. If it does, you do something to try to purify it. You break it down into next fractions. And you test each of those fractions in your bioassay to see if they have the kind of biological activity that you're looking for. And you can repeat this through layer and layer and layer of purification. In an ideal sense, after some number of layers, some number of levels, you get to pure compounds that are biologically active in the system that you care about, the important compounds. Okay, let me give you one example of something that I hope may be the next compound someday you're reading about in the local paper as a potential anti-cancer agent. That's my hope, not a promise, but a hope. So I want to tell you about Macaranga Schweinfurthii. I fell in love with this plant because don't you have to love something that's called Schweinfurthii? No? Anyone here speak German? A little bit? There was a famous German botanist named Heinrich Schweinfurthin. And so, do you know what the word Schweinfurthin means? I had to look it up. Wiemer's a fine German name too, but I had to look it up. I don't speak German that well. But apparently there's a city in Germany called Schweinfurth, and it was named after a place in the river that's shallow enough for the pigs to walk across. The Schwein go cross the river. I wander. And anyway, Heinrich Schweinfurthyn was a famous German botanist who wandered around Africa naming plants after himself, which is sort of a good gig if you could get it. And he named this one Macaranga Schweinfurthii. And then this guy, Dave Thomas, works for the Missouri Botanical Gardens, and the National Cancer Institute hired him to go wander around Africa for a year and collect plants. And he collected Macaranga Schweinfurthii. He collected this in 1987. Stuck it in a box, brought it back to the National Cancer Institute labs at Frederick, and it went into a warehouse. Now, I just flashed to this movie scene, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where at the end of the movie, they hide the Ark of the Covenant by nailing it into a wooden box and putting it in this room with millions of other wooden boxes. That's my picture of this lab, of this storage facility. I actually haven't seen it, but they must store hundreds and hundreds and thousands of samples there. They put this there in 1987, and it wasn't until 1997, 10 years later, that my friend and colleague John Butler, who works for NCI at Frederick, took it from the warehouse, took it into his lab, and extracted it. And what he found is that the extract was quite toxic to two central nervous system cancer cell lines. These are both glioblastoma cell lines, brain tumors. And brain tumors are among the most difficult forms of cancer to treat these days. Miserable things to get. If you have a glioblastoma, it's a miserable thing. So John was pretty excited about this because of the toxicity that these showed to this line. So he decided he was going to go through an activity-directed isolation sequence and see if he could figure out what the compounds were. So his initial extract was toxic to those cell lines, and he took that initial extract, and notice he started with 400 some grams, and his initial extract gave him 22, so that's about 5% of the mass of the plant. And he took that and divided it into 4 fairly crude fractions, and I put a weight by this one because he tested all 4 of them, and this was the only one that was active. So he threw fractions 1, 3, and 4 away and focused on fraction 2. And fraction 2 was divided into 5 sub-fractions, and only one of those was active when tested. And then he took that and he did 2 more levels to this to get to fraction 2 of these 5. And then finally, he took that fraction and split it out into 3 pure active compounds, which he very cleverly named Schweinfurthin A, B, and C. John's not much at nomenclature. Now, John was excited about this, and I'll show you the structures, but the structures don't tell why you should be excited. But these are the structures of Schweinfurthins A, B, and C. John published this in 1998. And Schwein A looks like this. Schwein B has a methyl group here instead of a hydrogen, and Schwein C is clearly in the same family. If you look at these, you can imagine sort of cutting the molecules in half across this central double bond. And the right half of the molecule is the same in all 3. The left half is a little different, but not as different as it might first look. There's a 10-carbon chain here, and if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that same 10 carbons has been sort of wrapped up and cyclized and oxidized a little bit, but it's actually clearly part of the same family. You've got these oxygens adjacent to another on this ring and in a 1-3 relationship over here.
Could some of the extractions have caused that to happen?
That is possible, but that's not the case in this one. That is possible, but that's not the case in this one. And I'll come back and explain why more. That's a good question. Now, when he got these, John was very excited because they were toxic to these cancer cells. Well, let me see. I'm going to show you. I'm going to skip around a little in time. Last year, another fellow, Dave Kingston at West Virginia Polytech in Blacksburg, found 4 related compounds that have a pretty similar structure. Only in these compounds, there's only 5 carbons at this right-hand edge, as opposed to the 10 carbons of the first Schweins. But they're pretty closely related. Now, when John got these compounds, he tested them in a bioassay that the National Cancer Institute uses pretty routinely to gauge the interest that they should have in some new compound or some extract. And this is called a 60 cell line bioassay, because there's 60 different types of cells that they measure in each of these experiments. And you can see at broad numbers what some of them are over here. There's some leukemias. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of leukemia cells that are tested. Some lung cancer, some colon, central nervous system, melanoma, ovarian, renal, prostate, and breast. All different types of cancer cells. Why do they do that? Well, I would like to suggest to you that it's not hard at all to kill a cancer cell. Okay? And I would bet that if we put our heads together in the next 2 minutes, we could come up with 200 ways of killing a cancer cell. I'll go first. My favorite way of killing a cancer cell is concentrated sulfuric acid, because no cancer cell survives in concentrated sulfuric acid, right? So I'm sure you can come up with other things. Somebody will say nitric acid or acetic acid or sodium hydroxide. I mean, there's all kinds of ways of killing cells. The trick isn't killing cells. The trick is killing cells selectively, because you want to kill the cancer cells and you don't want to kill every other cell in the patient. So the way they do this, they deliberately take these different types of cells, and what they're looking for is some that are more sensitive and some that are more resistant to a particular chemical. And they interpret that in a couple of different ways. If the bars go off here to the right, it means that the cell is dying from lower concentrations of the compound. If the bars go off to the left, it means that the cells are more resistant to the compounds. And so you can look at this pattern in these 60 bars, and what you can see is that the leukemia panel and the central nervous system panel are the ones that most uniformly are sensitive to the presence of the Schweinfurthins. So it's not really all that likely that the Schweins would ever be useful for treating some form of lung cancer. It's not that likely that they'd be useful for treating any form of ovarian cancer. But they might be useful for central nervous system cancers or leukemias. There's a couple of kidney cancer cell lines, a couple of breast cancer cell lines, and a prostate cancer cell line that are sensitive to these. Now, that's one of the ways that they use this assay. And the second way that they use this assay is to look at the pattern. And they have computers do this. And today, there's 184 compounds that are licensed for use in cancer treatments in this country. And they have this kind of graph for all 184 of them and for about 600,000 other compounds. For the 184, they do computer-type comparisons with logarithms that I don't understand. And they break them down into only 16 categories, 16 types, 16 ways of killing cancer cells. And then what was so exciting to the folks at the National Cancer Institute about the Schweinfurthins is that they don't fit any of the 16 patterns. And so what that suggests is that there's a 17th way of killing cancer cells and killing them selectively. It isn't proven yet, but it was sufficiently intriguing that they sent this poor guy back to Africa to get a whole bunch of the plant. And he came back the next time with 40 kilos. And they extracted it at Frederick, 40 kilos instead of 400 grams. And they extracted it at Frederick and found nothing. So they said, well, you got the wrong plant, or you collected it in the wrong place, or go back and get some more. And they sent him back again, and he came back with another 40 kilo sample. And they extracted it and found no activity. And he went back a third time, and he went back a fourth time. And by this time, they were getting a little frustrated because they never were able to re-isolate these compounds. Now, is it something that happened to them during the extraction? Is it something that happened where these compounds somehow formed while they sat for 10 years in the warehouse in Frederick? I don't know. But plant chemistry changes. You know that. You know all strawberries don't taste exactly the same. Corn isn't always exactly the same in sweetness. Carrots don't always taste exactly the same. It's got different chemistry depending on all kinds of circumstances. Asparagus always tastes bad, but it doesn't always taste the same, right? So plant chemistry changes, and all kinds of factors affect this. And because of this, and because of the fact that they couldn't find these in the natural source, John called me one day and he said, Dave, I'm desperate. I really need some more Schweinfurthins, and we can't get them from Africa. Could you make some for us? And I've known John for probably 25 years, and I know the kind of work that he does, and I know the quality of work that he does. And so I said, sure, I can make some Schweinfurthins for you. What's a Schweinfurthin? Okay, so I'm going to talk about this in sort of a general sense. If anybody cares, we've published this one a couple of years ago. But just in a general sense, the way you do this, well, here's a Schweinfurthin. You got the aromatic ring and an olefin and another aromatic ring and a chain and a chain. And the first way to do this, you go and look in a chemical company catalog and you see, does anybody sell a Schweinfurthin? And the answer is no. Okay? Otherwise, there wouldn't be any challenge. So then you sort of mentally break it down into pieces, and you say, well, if I had a 3-ring piece that looked like this and ended in an aldehyde, and a single ring piece that looked like this and ended in a phosphorus reagent, I think I know how I could stick them together. So you look in the catalogs. Does anybody make this? No. Does anybody make this? No. So you trace it back to simpler compounds, and ultimately we trace this back through a number of steps to this one that's shown down here, where we thought this aldehyde would become this aldehyde, this O-methyl group would become this one, and the oxygen here would eventually get tucked into this ring system. And this Aldrich does sell. A lot of other places do too. It's a common chemical called vanillin. It's actually the major component of vanilla extract. And so when we're working with this, it's sort of fun because, there's lots of advantages to using this as a starting material. It's abundant. Buy it from Aldrich. It's cheap. And all my graduate students would tell you, so am I. And it smells nice. And how many times have you gone to an organic chemistry lab and said, gee, that lab smells nice? Not real often. So we thought we could maybe trace this back. And in a sense, what we're doing here is mentally dissecting this into pieces of a puzzle. And we're saying if we had a piece that had this shape and a piece that had this shape, we know enough about puzzle solving that we could fit them together. That's the strategy of organic synthesis. That is how you do this. It's just that there are some steps along the way that can be more complicated than looking at that makes it seem. Now, I got 3-4 slides of hardcore organic, and I'll go through them sort of quickly. And if anybody wants to doze or go to the restroom, that's okay. So what I'm going to show first is how we made what we call the right half, because not too surprisingly, it's on the right side of the molecule as you look at the whole thing. And this is another chemical that Aldrich sells, 3,5-dihydroxybenzoic acid, abundant, cheap. It took us 3 steps to convert this to this benzylic alcohol with the oxygens protected as acetals, cleverly identified as mom acetals. Everybody likes mom. So now, what I want to explain about this is that we did this, it took us 3 steps in sequence. So you make A into B, B into C, C into D. And the problem with that is an organic chemist's nightmare that's called cumulative yield. Because if you get 90% at the first step and 90% at the second step, after 2 steps, you only got 80%. And if you get 60% at the third step, you take another hit as you go through this. In this case, we were able to optimize this out so we could go through the 3 steps and get 60% yield. That's pretty good. Good enough. We were willing to take that, and then we did 3 more steps to this to add this side chain. And the next set of 3 steps gave us 58% yield. So now we're 6 steps into this, and there's all the time it takes to do that. And if you run out of the compound you've made at step 6, you still can't buy it anyplace. You have to make it again. And now we got 60% of the 60%. I feel like Boss Hogg on Dukes of Hazzard. I have 10% of your 10%. And then we go yet 3 more steps, and these work pretty good. But we're 9 steps into this sequence here, and the overall yield is dwindling fast. And the truth is, this is the good side of the molecule. The other side is more complicated. We started with vanillin and took 2 steps, but they were already known, so I didn't even draw them here, to add this bromine and reduce the aldehyde to the alcohol. So we're 2 steps in at this stage, 3, 4, 5, and we're at this stage here. And at this stage, we've made this alcohol as enriched in a particular enantiomer. Not pure, So we had to do 2 more steps, making an ester so we could separate diastereomers and then hydrolyzing it back, sort of a side shunt.
What kind of solvent did you use with these N-butyl lithium and so forth? Those things are...
Tetrahydrofuran.
What?
Tetrahydrofuran. Those
things will burn in air, won't they?
Yes. And if you read the bottle label, it's a little bit misleading because N-butyl lithium, the bottle label says this is pyrophoric. It burns in air. But, you pull it out with a syringe and the end of the syringe smokes a little bit, but it doesn't really burn. Sec-butyl lithium, the bottle label says this is pyrophoric. It'll burn in air. And you pull the syringe out of the bottle and it smokes a little bit, but it's not really bad. Then you go to tertiary butyl lithium and you pull it out of the bottle and it's a little candle burning at the end. And when a candle burns at the end, the liquid that's inside the syringe heats up and expands, and that's really interesting. So you do have to know what you're doing, and it is got some problems. But on a laboratory scale, now I'm not sure that this is a synthesis that could be done on a ton scale, where it's very difficult to use alkylithium reagents, and it can be, but it's difficult. But at the moment, we don't know that it's important to do it on a ton scale. We wanted to make some so that they could test it more thoroughly and find out. So what are we here? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 steps in to get to this alcohol. 12 steps, cumulative yield actually turned out to be 12%. That's the only way I remember that. So you start off with a kilo and you get a gram or 2 at the end. I mean, handling losses and efficiency of the synthesis. And then we still had to oxidize this to get back to a new aldehyde, and then we condensed it with the right half and did one more step to put these 2 together. And we made a Schweinfurthin, the first synthesis of a Schweinfurthin. And again, if you're interested, this is found in some of these papers. Now we did this, and we completed this sequence originally in 2005, but we did it better in 2007 in this paper, if you're interested. And we sent this to the National Cancer Institute, and we sent them 100 milligrams. And they thought they were rich. And they used it all up and then asked us for more. And so we're still making more. But they used it in experiments in mice, and those experiments seem very promising. It doesn't just kill the mice. They don't take a shot and then fall over dead. The mice live for quite a while, and their tumors shrink, which is all good stuff. So they're more and more excited about this. And the more excited they are about this, the more we need to try to improve the synthesis, because the more excited they get, the more compound they want. So this isn't published yet, but I have a young graduate student named Joe who came up with a better sequence. He came into my office one day and said, "Dr. Wiemer, I've got a better sequence." And I said, "Well, Joe, we've worked on this for quite a while. Are you sure it's going to be better?" He said, "I'm sure it's going to be better." I said, "Okay, go try it." Wow, works like a charm. What do I know? So same compound over here, the bromovanillin, and now Joe makes a methyl ether here, and then uses butyl lithium again and geranyl bromide to make that bond. Then he uses a She epoxidation to make the epoxide directly instead of the 3 steps we used before. BF3, a Lewis acid to catalyze the cyclization instead of a protic acid. And he can get up to this stage and then a DDQ oxidation to get to the aldehyde in 7 steps instead of 12, and 57% yield instead of 12. So Joe was right. He could do it better. And he's a great student. What he doesn't know is that I'm going to keep him forever. No, I'm not. So what's the future of the Schweins? Well, I don't know. Someday they may be something that you or someone you know is actually treated with in a clinic. That's a possibility. There's an awful lot of work to be done between now and then, though. Because if these were useful in treating brain cancers, but they immediately poisoned your liver, that's not a fair trade. You've got to have both. So there's all kinds of studies, and the National Cancer Institute is still to be done. And the National Cancer Institute is pursuing these, limited only by how fast we can make more stuff for them. But even beyond that, even if the Schweins themselves never make it into the clinic, I think there's a real potential that this will lead to a new strategy for killing cancer cells. Taxol, by the way, defined the 15th strategy for killing cancer cells. And the Schweinfurthins could define the 17th. Okay? They could. We don't know. We assume that these interact with some protein in a way that screws up metabolism. But what that protein is and how that works, we don't know. We're trying to figure that out. We've made some fluorescent analogs of these compounds to study where they localize. They seem to go to the ER, inducing some form of ER stress that leads to apoptosis. Why? How? We don't really know. We're trying to build some analogs that we can use to actually fish out the proteins that they bind to, but that's assuming they bind to proteins. So I don't know. We got lots of work to do, but we think it's eminently worthwhile. And this last bullet's a little hokey, but it just reminds me to get back to what I came to talk about tonight, herbal products. And this is just another demonstration. The Schweinfurthins came from a plant. They came from an African plant. I'm going to talk about this one just much more briefly. You can also look at natural remedies to see if you can find pure compounds that might be useful in a pharmaceutical sense. And there's an NIH-sponsored botanical center at Iowa State University. You folks are from Michigan. I'm sure you're familiar with, you got Michigan State. Well, in Iowa, we've got Iowa, the good school, and we've got Iowa State, the evil twin down the road 100 miles or so. So these folks at Iowa State's got great programs in all kinds of things agricultural. They've got the vet school, they've got all kinds of, they've got the agricultural school, nutrition and horticulture and food science. They got some good folks in chemistry. George Krauss is a very good synthetic chemist and a nice guy. Botany, they got a lot of experts. But in all of Iowa State University, they didn't have a single person who'd ever extracted a plant. So when they decided they wanted to extract some of these natural remedies, they had to come to the University of Iowa and ask moi to extract a plant for them. And so, of course, they did. So we're partners in this with them. Nicole is in our Center for Alternative Medicines. Bob's in epidemiology. I'm in the chemistry department at the University of Iowa, not the evil twin. Stats and Wendy Mori. And I'm going to show some of Wendy's work with this, too, tonight as we go on. So we've been focused on two particular herbal remedies. Echinacea, purple coneflower, it's native to the eastern U.S. It grows wild in Michigan. There's 9 species. Native Americans use 3 of them in different ways. They're pretty. I used to grow these in my front yard before I knew what they were. But you've maybe seen them growing around here too, because it's pretty common. They're decorative. Yeah, they're just pretty. But they may also be useful. And Hypericum is a plant that was imported from Europe, actually imported by the Pilgrims. It was brought over under cultivation, but it's escaped and it grows wild over much of North America now. It was also used, long history of folk medicine. I haven't been able to grow this, and I've tried since I've been working on this project. I like to garden. It's my major hobby. But I haven't been able to grow this one. But they can at Iowa State. Again, good reason for having that school down the road. Now, if you wanted to isolate compounds that might be useful as pharmaceutical drugs from these natural remedies, what would you do? Well, there are a lot of compounds that are already known from them. People have ground them up and extracted and looked at what was most abundant. But what's most abundant isn't necessarily what's biologically active. It can be minor trace components that have major biological activity. And so the approach we have focused on is using this activity-directed isolation sequence. And then what do you want to use as a bioassay? Well, we could use our anti-cancer bioassays, and in some sense it would be easier to do that. Because you can look through a microscope and tell pretty easily if a cell is alive or dead. But we think the assays should be somehow related to natural applications of the material. And echinacea and St. John's wort are actually used to treat colds and depression. And it's a lot harder to look through a microscope and tell if a cell is depressed. So our assumption, our working hypothesis, was that perhaps both of these were actually tied to different types of viral infections. And so we've been using antiviral bioassays to try to guide a fractionation sequence through these plants. This shows where we are right now with Hypericum. And we're not done. We've gone through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 levels. And we've got fractions that are purified but not pure. And active but you can't identify what's in them because they're still too complicated. So we're working on these. But it seems very interesting. Wendy Morey in our microbiology department has been doing antiviral bioassays, and she's had particular success using the AIDS virus in her bioassays. So if you look at this one over here, what you're looking at is a graph where she's showing the viability of the HIV virus and the viability of the cells that it's growing in. So she treats some cells with our fraction E1, and the cell vitality plummets, and the virus seems happy as a clam. I guess clams are happy, I don't really know. But when she got to fraction E4, notice that the bars are in the opposite order. So now the cells are happy, and the virus is not doing so well. So we took E4 and split it into E4 sub 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then she assayed these. And E4.7 is one of the more interesting ones because the cell viability is high, around 80% of the initial viability, and the viral activity is down about 20%. So it seems like there may be something in this extract that has antiviral activity without killing the cells. Now, it's not hard to kill viruses either. What's your favorite chemical for killing viruses? Concentrated sulfuric acid. Okay? And go through this again. You can kill a virus with a hammer, but you don't want to do that. So now this graph is with this fraction E47, and it just shows concentration dependency to this. Wendy drew the black boxes here as HIV, and so what you see is that as the amount of material added to the cultures is increased, the viral titer goes dramatically down, but the cell viability stays pretty level. So that's an indication that there's something in this extract. We just don't know yet exactly what that is. But it's something, and it seems very promising. Okay, that's the end of the science. I got a couple of disclaimers, and I want to come back and talk about the latest stacker products. Give them an ad, maybe. Okay, this is from the USDA website. All plants contain toxins and carcinogens. I agree 100%. This next, I agree with the sentiment. I'm not sure it's phrased quite correctly. Even commonly adjusted food plants like peanuts can be fatally allergic to sensitive people. Is that phrased right? I mean, the peanuts don't die when they get to allergic people. It's the people that have allergies to the peanuts. But you see the point. They don't serve peanuts on airplanes anymore because a small percentage of the population is so sensitive to peanut oil. Now that doesn't explain why they don't serve any other snacks, but that's at least why they don't serve peanuts. So people have allergies. People respond differently, and plants can be tough. My disclaimer, I'm not a physician. If you're taking an herbal supplement, I'm not telling you to stop. If you're not taking one, I'm not telling you to start. What I would tell you is that if you decide to take one, keep your doctor informed. Let me offer a hypothetical situation. Assume, for the sake of argument, that I've been having some minor problems with my appendix. I don't know, where's my appendix? That's my problem. I can't find my appendix. So I go back home and I talk to my doctor, and she says, well, it's probably time we took that out, Dave. Let's schedule this sometime in the next couple of weeks, and we'll just take it out so it's not bothering you anymore. Okay. The next question she would probably ask me for elective surgery is, are you taking aspirin? Because a lot of adult Americans take an aspirin a day, and I'm one of them, on her advice. So, of course I'm taking aspirin. You told me to. Okay. Well, let's schedule the surgery a couple weeks out, because aspirin interferes with your blood's ability to clot, and stop taking the aspirin for 2 weeks, and then we'll do the surgery. So your blood clotting function is back to normal. Okay, I can agree to that. Now, she never asked me if I'm taking white willow bark. Okay? And if I wasn't the PhD chemist who had taken the time to look at what's in white willow bark, I wouldn't tell her, or I wouldn't ask her, do you want me to stop taking the white willow bark supplement that I'm taking too? You know, I can ask her that because I'm aware of this. But how many people are? And so my pitch to you is, if you're taking an herbal supplement, keep your doctor informed. It is a chemical. It is a drug. What's the difference between natural and unnatural? In that context, not much. Not much. So keep your physician informed, because these things interact. And a lot of physicians went through medical school at a time where they really looked down on herbal remedies and herbal treatments, and they weren't taught anything about them. And I think that's probably overly extreme in a different direction, because there may be some benefit there. There's a lot of people who claim that they derive benefits from herbal supplements. Latest Stacker products. Stacker 2 XPLC. Suggested use, 1 capsule after meals. Do not exceed 3 daily. Well, they've cut down the dosage. That's a good thing. They've taken the ephedra out. They've made the pill smaller. It's a proprietary blend. You got to look really carefully into this, but it's only 250 mgs instead of 500. What does it contain? Yohimbine alkaloids. It would take me another hour to tell you why you don't want to take yohimbine alkaloids, but trust me, you don't really want to take yohimbine alkaloids, especially when this is a crude mixture of yohimbine alkaloids extracted from a plant that contains a lot of different ones. Yerba mate, fruit, guarana. This is cousin to chocolate, and it's got theobromine in it, which is the caffeine equivalent in chocolate. Cola nut seeds, so that's equivalent to 3 milligrams of caffeine alkaloids. Capsaicin, and then caffeine, anhydrous, 250 milligrams. 250 milligrams? Do they mean 250 milligrams of caffeine? If they do, it's only a 255 milligram tablet. That's a lot of caffeine. Okay, look at the ingredients. Stacker 2 XPLC. Dibasic calcium phosphate, okay, gelatin, dextrose, stearic acid, magnesium stearate, titanium dioxide. That is not my typo. What's the first rule of websites? Don't buy anything from a website that can't spell. Okay? And look down here. They've got this Stacker 2 XPLC sticks. What's in it? Dibasic calcium phosphate, gelatin, stearic acid, titanium dioxide. If they don't know the difference between titanium and titanium, you don't want to be buying your drugs from them. That would be my approach. But their most recent product is the one I have the most fun with. I caught a young gentleman in my building, the chemistry building in Iowa, using Stacker 2 XPLC Dieters Water Supplement. Okay. Now they sell you this for $29.95 for 12 19-ounce bottles, I think it says someplace in the fine print. What's in it? 19.44 fluid ounces. Stacker 2 Dieters Water, 19.4. 12 bottles, $29.95. What a bargain. What's in it? Water. Water. It's water. Purified water. Natural, artificial flavors. Potassium benzoate. It's a preservative. You eat it in bread probably anyway. Citric acid, caffeine. Can't have your water without caffeine. Sucralose. Yohimbe. This is spelt wrong too, and it's not my typo. Yohimbe alkaloids. Why do they want to put yohimbine alkaloids in water? I have no clue. But they give you all this lovely diet information. Okay, calories, 0. Why? It's water. Water doesn't have calories. Total fat, 0. 0 saturated fat, 0 trans fat, 0 cholesterol. Water doesn't have cholesterol. Dietary fiber, well, unless you got little pieces of wood floating in it, you don't have any dietary fiber or sugars or proteins. It's water. But they can apparently sell this at quite a price, and people buy it because I saw someone in my own building drinking this. Or at least he used to. He won't anymore. Not in my building. It's forbidden. There's 2 signs out front. One says no smoking, and the other one says no Stacker 2 products. Okay, just some acknowledgments. The Carver Charitable Trust is an Iowa foundation that supported some of my work. The National Institutes of Health supports the Botanical Center and has supported some of our work. For reasons really interesting in a political sense. The Army has a breast cancer research program. You know, they buy tanks at $300 million apiece, and they spend $300 million on their breast cancer program. So that's one less tank, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. And they supported us for a while. I should thank them. I'm in the Department of Chemistry at the University of Iowa, and these are some of the people that did work with me on this. Let's see. Nolan and Joe and Natalie are working on different aspects of the Schweinfurthins, and Jeff in the background here has done all of the work with the extracts of hypericum that I mentioned briefly. And then these are the rest of my students standing in front of the chemistry building at the university. I guess Larry's standing in front of the University of Iowa. Oh, well. He's from Texas. What can I say? And then this is the middle of my campus, and this is what it looked like when I left. I'm hopeful that by the time I get back, you'll be able to see some grass in front of the old Capitol again. But this is sort of the centerpiece, the historic building in the middle of our campus. So that's it. That's my story. I'd like to thank the officers of the local section again for the invitation, and all of you tonight for your patience in listening to me. Thank you.